Margaret Morgan was born in the prairies in Regina in the Depression. And she was the oldest of 4 kids. And during the Depression, her mother and her father split up. So her mother packed up the 4 kids and took the train across the country to Vancouver and arrived in Vancouver with no income and 4 kids. And so she found a place to live on East 12th Street, I believe. And they went there, and Margaret at this point, I think, is probably 9 or 10 years old. And so Margaret starts off life in Vancouver. Basically, her mother is incapable of working. I think her, and without getting into details that I don't really know, her mother struggled with mental health issues, a number of issues, and she produced dishcloths. She knitted dishcloths and other things, and Margaret's job was to sell the dishcloths. And so she went out and sold the dishcloths door to door to pay for the family, to support the family when she was like 10 or 11 years old. And so that went on for a number of years where Margaret really became part of the leader of the family. And she took care of them for quite a long time. And then when she was in her teens, she moved away. And the first place she went to was to the Northwest Territories, where she got a job. You have to love this. She got a job in the Northwest Territories working for 2 mining companies. She was executive assistant to one mining company, the president, and the executive assistant to the other mining company, the president, and she didn't tell either one of them she was working for them. And she got away with this for some months before she got caught. And that was Margaret. And I want to say that says a lot about Margaret because she had some spunk. She had some ability to really just do courage. One word that describes Margaret set new paths for people, So after that, during the war, she worked in Montreal, and she took flying lessons, and she became I should be looking at you. During the war, she took flying lessons. I think she was trying to become a pilot in the war, but that wasn't going to happen. But she went off and took flying lessons. She tells this wonderful story about the time she finally got to go up to go solo and people came to see this woman fly this airplane and it was all great. She said, I wasn't worried about flying the airplane. What I was really worried about was coming back to the airport and knowing that there was only one washroom for men only. I thought it says a lot about the time, right? But, adversity came to her at all points in her life. Margaret faced adversity. So before the end of the war, she got tuberculosis. And both her lungs were infected, and so she ended up in a sanatorium in Thunder Bay. And she stayed there for over a year, bedridden, to beat tuberculosis, which she did. Margaret beat tuberculosis, and then so she came out of there and came back to Vancouver, where she started in a job. She started a job working in directing couriers, etc. And she had met Lefty before, but she decided that's when she met Lefty, that's right. She met Lefty then and decided she was going to marry him, but of course he was already married. So it'd be at least another 10 years before they actually got married. Many other things would happen along the way. The other story she tells about is, during the 30s going down to Hastings Street to work. And she was hired to make gloves. So she was in there working, and at the end of the day of making gloves, her hands were all bloody. So they said to her, "You're fired," and kicked her out. And I just thought another snippet in her life. Margaret Morgan understood working class people, but she also understood the value of education. She got into UBC as a poor kid from the east side of Vancouver. She got her degree, and then she went back after the war and got her teaching certificate so she could go and teach. And she went off and became a teacher in Coquitlam. And from there, she actually rose up to be a principal. And went back to school and got more education, went back to Simon Fraser, got education at Simon Fraser, and at that point became the first full-time president, full-time president of a BCTF teachers local in the province. So Margaret was always moving things forward. In 1961, Margaret and Lefty were founding members of the NDP, even though Lefty was way left of the NDP, and Margaret was too. She would many times phone me up and tell me what was going on and how it was all crazy and what are you guys doing now? Get on with it, you've sold the fort, the soul, everything. She had a very strong idea of right and wrong. Margaret knew what was right and wrong. And the other area she was very involved in was Amnesty International. And Amnesty International, of course, was about helping people around the world. And I think that was part of the Nicaragua connection and why we got connected around Nicaragua. She had a world view. She believed the world was a big place and that we were part of it. And that we weren't living in Canada, we weren't living in Vancouver, we weren't living in, Deep Cove. We were living on the planet as part of the world. And I think that informed most of her life. Many years ago, I was working at the United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union, and we'd been making trips to Nicaragua. And we were, at that point, we had begun building a boat to send to fishermen in Nicaragua. And that boat was really our gift to those fishermen in honor of their struggle to actually make their country democratic, to get rid of a dictatorship, and to build a better world. And so we started building this boat thinking we'll get it done in a year or two, and we'll send it down there, and it dragged on, and it turned into a much bigger job than we ever imagined, and a much more expensive job than we ever imagined. And Al Brown was the fisherman doing all the work. We all helped, but it was Al's project. And we got to the point where we didn't have a motor for the boat. And that was $25,000, of which none of us had. And so a woman named, at this point, Margaret Morgan, came into my office at the union and said, I'm Margaret. And I said, great to meet you. And she said, my husband just died, and I want to do something to honor him, but I don't want to donate the money to something, like, a charity or whatever. I want to raise something for the boat to Nicaragua. Lefty loved Nicaragua, and we have friends down there, and we believe in what they're doing down there. So I thought about it a second, and I looked at her, and I said, so how would you feel about a $25,000 donation for the motor? And without missing a beat, she said, sure, I'll go raise that money. Is it $25,000? I said, yeah. He said, yeah, I'll go raise that money. So Margaret went off, and up and down the rail lines in the province where Lefty had been, the engineer and all his friends and stuff, they just passed the hat up and down that rail line. She went to her friends, she went to all Lefty friends, and about 6 months later, she came back with $25,000 and said, here's the engine. Now, it was just one of those amazing moments you have, like, holy cow, that was amazing. But the rest of the story is that I got elected to one of the leaders of the union, a lot of us got busy, the boat dragged on, and she kicked our ass to finish the boat. And she went to Nicaragua, and she set up the boat project down there. I went down with her the second time. We spent 3 weeks in Nicaragua setting it up together. And she was the one that was responsible for finishing the boat that we started. And that's because she was driven. And she was tough.